The Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 16th chapter. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." The Gospel of the Lord. A man took a seat in the theater, but he was too far from the stage, and so he whispered to the usher, "This play's a murder mystery, and I like this type of play so much, I really would like to be up close where I can watch the actors and catch all the dialogue. If you get me a better seat, I'll give you a handsome tip." And so the usher moved him all the way up to the second row, and the man reached into his pocket and he quietly handed the usher a dollar bill. Well, the usher took one look at his tip, and then he leaned over and he whispered into the man's ear, "The wife did it." Now, I don't know about you, but I think the usher should be commended. I mean, he'd been taken advantage of, but he got his revenge in a cunning, clever, one might even say shrewd sort of way. Jesus once said to his disciples, as he sent them out on their mission, "Be wise as serpents." And today, in the boldest of all parables Jesus ever told, he teaches that wisdom, common sense, and a little bit of nerve are needed in the life of faith. The parable is that of the unjust steward, the hero of which is a crafty crook. Well, the lesson tells us that once there was a rich man who had a squandering estate manager who mismanaged the rich man's affair, and so the rich man dismissed him. This rascal's number is up. He's received his notice. He's soon going to be unemployed. Well, what to do? So the steward realized that he was too soft for hard labor and too proud to beg. So to ensure his future, he makes some clever moves before he was forced to leave his position. As he was looking over the ledger one last time, he saw his opportunity. He called in two persons who were deeply in debt to his boss, and he cut one man's bill in half, and he lopped a good bit off the other bill. You see, before walking out in the dog-eat-dog world, he prudently made sure he had some IOUs to fall back on. In other words, he had earned the favor of a few people who just might be inclined to employ him in the future. But then the parable reaches its unusual conclusion. The master returns, he looks at the books, he discovers what this conniving rascal has done, and of all things, commends him. Jesus finishes up the parable by holding up the dishonest servant as an example to his followers by saying, the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. Jesus praises the steward not for his morals or his value system, but for having common sense enough to act shrewdly in a tight spot. And what he's saying is, give me followers who will show as much prudence, as much foresight, as much bravado in God's business as worldly people often show in theirs. Another way to say it, it's better to be a resourceful rascal for the sake of God's kingdom than it is to be a saintly nitwit. We often approach our faith in God from such a very pragmatic, practical point of view. We're definitely interested, we're even invested, but seldom do we apply to the living out of our faith the same kind of resourcefulness that we give to our work, our recreations, even our own well-being. Someone has said people will wrangle for religion, fight for it, even die for it. Anything but live for it. So Jesus calls us to be as creative and cunning as the unjust steward in finding ways to live out our faith. A father once took his little daughter to the beach, but he couldn't get her to go in the water. The little girl just thought the water was too cold, and so she just remained on the sand. Well, after persuasion failed, the father built a fire. He heated some water in a container until it was steaming, and then he dramatically walked to the edge of the water and poured it into the ocean. His daughter was so impressed by the display. Guess what? She went into that water. Yes, she did. But what kind of fervor, dedication, determination, and creativity are we willing to apply to how we live out our faith? And more broadly, how is it that we can live out our faith as a faith community so that people not only take notice of us, but are intrigued by what we're up to? How do we get people to wade in the water, especially when the water seems so cold to them? How do we invite people to church when the last place some of those people want to be is in church? Think about first century Christianity. It is radical. It turned the world upside down. The good news that the early faith community was about was considered category smashing. It was anti-institutional, and it was contrary to the status quo of that day and time. Those in power considered Christianity to be dangerous. And you know what? With that kind of controversy surrounding it, it spread like wildfire. People were attracted to the challenge, to the adventure. They wanted to be part of something bigger than their own lives, something cutting edge, something that called them to live beyond the boundaries of caution and carefulness. They were risk takers, and the fire of faith burned within them. The early faith communities had no fear. They spoke the truth no matter what the consequence. They made the world a bit uncomfortable. They were filled with passion and gratitude, and daily they lived with a sense of being overwhelmed by the grace of God. But something changed. Too often today, the church resembles something more like a retirement home. And I'm not referring to the age of most of the folks in our faith community, but religion today has this reputation of being dull and boring and lifeless and often irrelevant to daily life. How exciting is that? Many churches are afraid to take a stand. They're afraid that someone might be offended, afraid that people will leave. The institutional church is alive and well, even our own ELCA, and much of what any religious organization does is to make decisions that preserve the institution. And we run every chance of becoming just like any other institutional congregation, especially now that we've completed the organization process, unless we consciously make a choice not to be. Jesus says today, snap out of it. I need you to be clever and shrewd. I need you to speak the truth in a culture of lies. I need you to be creatively finding new ways to do this thing called church, to be the church I'm calling you to be. I need the life you live as individuals and as a faith community to be a reflection of my own. Quit being complacent. Put your mind and heart and your spirit into it. And don't forget to use your imagination. The world still needs me, therefore I need you, Jesus says. I need you to be my voice, my hands, my feet, my presence, my heart. In short, Jesus wants to explode the myth many of us learned a long time ago. Years ago in Sunday school, the lesson we all learned was that to be a good Christian boy or girl meant that we had to be nice to everyone. And we grew up thinking that to be a Christian meant being nice. Now, I don't think that's an accurate picture of faith. Neither do I think it's the example that Jesus set. Jesus did have a soft spot in his heart for the widow, the orphan, the blind, the lame, the dying. But remember too, he often spoke harsh words of judgment to the Pharisees, and wherever he went, he generally managed to offend a good number of people with his words and ideas. He spoke truth, even when it was unpopular, and he had a knack for making people extremely uncomfortable. Eventually, his unniceness got him into trouble. Yes, he loved people, but don't reduce his love to some mushy, warm, fuzzy, empty kind of love. His love was powerful. It had substance. Sometimes it was a gentle, soothing kind of love, and sometimes it was a fiery, unsettling kind of love. We are called to love people. We are called to be kind to those in need of kindness. But are we always called to be nice? The brand of faith we're called to is sometimes not nice. And sometimes we are called to be shrewd, wise, clever rascals for the sake of the kingdom of God. We become courageous, bold, brave, and maybe even just a little obnoxious for Jesus. You know, Jesus didn't make the ultimate sacrifice so we could go around and make the world a nicer place. He did so that we could make the world a better place. And there's a big difference between the two. So do we simply want to become a nice new little church in Palm Springs? Or do we really want to make a difference in this community and in the lives of those who live here? Perhaps we could create such an adventure that our hearts will suddenly beat faster, our lives will forever be altered, and our faith will be set on fire. Do the first thing and Palm Springs won't even notice us. Do the second and Palm Springs will say, "So who are those people?" Which church do you think God is asking us to become? Which direction is God's Spirit inspiring us to take? What sort of shrewdness, fortitude, boldness, courageousness, determination, tenacity, moxie, fearlessness, and imagination are we called to be about? You know, now that we've completed the organization process of becoming a church, now we begin again to do the work of being church. Bring this work we do together at River of Hope, your compassion, your kindness, your love, your generosity, and your beautiful spirits as you always do. That's all beautiful stuff. But also bring your brains, your craftiness, and your shrewdness. And together, let's shape a church.